Oz, co-founder of RMA and host of The Social Capitalist, bringing you analysis and advice from thought leaders in this new era of social business. I'm very excited about the show today. With popular blog columns in Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Psychology Today, and a new book entitled Succeed, How We Can All Reach Our Goals, Heidi Halvorson is a motivational psychologist the business community is increasingly turning towards to understand what she calls the science of success. Heidi, welcome.
Thank you.
So first, the basics. What do you mean by success, and what do you mean by science?
Oh, those are good questions. I think in terms of success, I usually, because it is so personal, different people according to their values and their desires will have different ideas about what constitutes success. So when I talk about it, I'm generally talking about it in the sense of achieving your goals, whatever it is you are hoping to get out of your personal life, out of your professional life, and how can you be more effective in getting to that place where you're sort of realizing your wishes, your dreams, your desires. Now, having said that, it is true that there are some kinds of goals that we pursue that seem to be more likely to lead to sort of that sense of lasting well-being and satisfaction, and that we all sort of associate with success. And I think those tend to be, and the research suggests that those tend to be goals having to do with things like acquiring new skills and knowledge, developing our abilities. When our goals are about connecting with other people, with the people in our personal lives, with our community, and also goals that have to do with sort of being authentically yourself. So doing things that you find interesting, enjoyable, that speak to something about you. These kinds of goals seem to, when we're able to reach them, seem to lead to a kind of an authentic happiness that we don't get from pursuing goals that are more related to getting validation from other people or accumulating, say, power or wealth for the sake of wealth. You can be happy when you reach those goals, but you don't get that sense of lasting well-being. So I try to, in the work that I do, not only give people tools for how to be more effective in reaching their goals, but also give them some guidance as to what kinds of goals they really should be devoting themselves to and what kinds of goals are really the best ones to pursue. Now, in terms of what do I mean by science, I think that's where my approach is different from a lot of the other people in this sort of motivational space. A lot of the advice you read from people who are writing about motivation comes from their personal experiences, anecdotes, kind of individual success stories. And while those can be valuable, in many instances, the advice is not very practical, it's not very useful, it's difficult to implement in your own life, and sometimes it's actually just sort of wrong, that our intuitions often let us down when it comes to what makes us successful, why we reach our goals, why we sometimes fail to reach our goals. So I take, because my background is in research, my training is as an experimental scientist, so I take the approach of looking not at sort of individual stories, but really in terms of looking at hundreds of people at a time. So people in motivation who do research look at people in the workspace, in the classroom, on the playing field, at home, and we ask them about what kinds of things they did and look to see whether or not that made them successful. So you're able, when you kind of take a step back and look at lots of people at the same time trying to achieve a particular goal, you're able to see much more objectively what works and what doesn't and why. So the advice that I try to concentrate on is advice that comes from decades of research on motivation, and that so people can feel that they can trust it because we know that it works.
So the application of all of these new, and when I say new, the last 30 years of focus on as you say, the science of success or achievement. What you said something incredibly provocative, I thought, that you make suggestions in your book, and that you have it implied that you have the answer. But what are the best goals to pursue? As in, what goals kind of create the most well-being, the most fulfillment, the most, I think you said, authenticity. What are those best goals?
Well, again, they have to do with, it's a broad class of goals. So it's not that there are 3 very specific things you need to do. But it all comes down to why you're pursuing the goal that you are pursuing. So if you are trying to, for example, get ahead at work, which many of us are, kind of climb the ladder, are you doing it because you find it personally challenging and rewarding, or are you doing it in order to, for example, seek the approval of other people? So often it's not about necessarily what the goal is on the surface, but really the why that matters. And when we choose goals in our lives that satisfy our basic human needs, there have been a lot of people have been arguing for thousands of years about what human beings really need in life. And really the consensus in psychology has kind of focused on 3 in particular. We talk about the need for, and they seem to be universal cross-culturally, the need for belonging. So people have this basic need to relate to other people and to be a part of meaningful groups, to contribute to their community. Another need is the need for what psychologists call competence, and that has to do with sort of growing our abilities, working on new skills, acquiring knowledge, being able to sort of impact your environment in meaningful ways. And then the third basic human need has to do with this sense that psychologists call autonomy, that the idea that we do things because we're intrinsically motivated to do them, because they reflect something about our values, who we are as unique individuals. So really, it's the why that matters. Why are you deciding to go to medical school? Why are you doing what you're doing at work? Why are you in a particular relationship? And if it's to satisfy these basic needs, then if you are successful, that's going to bring you that kind of authentic, lasting happiness that many of us associate with being truly successful. It's when our actions and our goals are motivated really by things outside ourselves, by the approval of others, by seeking things like power and fame for their own sake, rather than to use them to do something positive. Those kinds of goals can make us happy. Certainly, when you reach a goal, you're going to feel some happiness. The question is whether or not that happiness is fleeting. And if your goals really satisfy these basic human needs that we all seem to have, relatedness, competence, and autonomy, then that happiness is going to be a more lasting, deeper happiness than you would have otherwise. Achieving goals is always a good thing, but when we pursue things that really satisfy us as human beings, then you're going to have another level of happiness than you would otherwise have.
So the correlation between happiness and achievement is one of the things we're talking about here. I want to also talk about, what fascinates me is you have these 30, 40 years of research that you've been immersed in, not for all 30 years, but you have, and also personally conducted, distinguishes you from so many others who have written about goals and so on. I want to know, sort of from a meta, a bit from some altitude, whether in aggregate all of this new social science research, do we have a different view of human potential? Has it changed? And is there a consensus now on our ability to change and tap into that? Tell me about that.
Absolutely. I think personally it's changed me very much in learning what I had about this science as a graduate student and as a researcher and a professor. I came into very much, like many Americans certainly, came into graduate school thinking that I was smart because I was born that way, and that there were many things I wasn't good at because I was born that way, and that, that whether or not you are successful in different domains of your life has everything to do with essentially your DNA, that these are that abilities are more or less innate qualities. And I discovered that was wrong. And there really is, I think now, a great deal of consensus about the malleability of abilities, of human abilities. So in other words, even things that we tend to think of as very much innate, like intelligence, willpower, creativity, conscientiousness, that we think are kind of, people are born this way. It turns out to not be the case at all. Now, having said that, it's of course true that your DNA matters to the extent that you may have certain predispositions. You may be born with a temperament that it lends itself to the study of certain kinds of things or to excelling in certain domains. But nobody ever really gets to be very good at anything without tremendous effort and persistence and practice. And that's something that was very eye-opening for me. It was also eye-opening for me to realize that the story I had been telling myself my whole life about, up until that point, about why I was good at some things and not at others was wrong. So it showed me really two very important things. One, that human abilities of all kinds, whether you are talking about intelligence or social skill, leadership abilities, these things are all very malleable. So we can absolutely, with persistence and patience and the right expertise, the right help, get better at really just about anything that you set your mind to. And there is really a tremendous amount of evidence for that now, particularly in domains like intelligence that we used to think of as really quite genetically determined. The second thing that I think is really important is, and I know this again from firsthand experience, is that we're often very surprisingly wrong in the stories we tell ourselves about our successes and our failures. And this is one of the reasons why I think you have to be a little bit careful when you pick up the biography or the autobiography of some tremendously successful famous person, and they're telling you about the secrets of their success. Well, they might be right, but they might be wrong. They might actually be attributing their success to things that were things that made them successful. It's really amazing how we can sometimes latch on to stories about ourselves that seem perfectly plausible that in fact are wrong. And in America, I think there is a tremendous, in this culture, a tremendous emphasis on ability. We love stories about prodigies and child geniuses, and we're fascinated by them. And when we look at successful people, we tend to look at them and say, wow, that person is so smart. That person is different than me in some way because they were born with something that I don't have. When we look at our own difficulties, we tend to blame it on a lack of some ability that we don't think that we can get our hands on. And that really isn't the way success works. It's not the way achievement works. And it's actually really, I think, doing ourselves quite a disservice in much of the.
Heidi, let me push you on that because, that is the sort of, there's so much literature out now, and it's such a sellable kind of idea that
it is. It's true.
That achievement is not innate, and we are not our genetic destiny, and to deliberate practice and 10,000 hours and so on is what it's all about. But and then there is this kind of correlate in terms of our own obsession with prodigies and so on. But just taking the devil's advocate position here, I would say if we're in the realm of achievement, that's one area, these prodigies and these people who have achieved great successes, and they talk about their autobiographies that are very easy to point to, and they give their 10-point plan for doing so, and we kind of follow them, even though it seems kind of unachievable. Mm-hmm. Now, but you come along and other people and say, look, there's a science to success. It's not innate, and it brings this great hope of that real transformation. Even success, unsuccessful adults can actually transform themselves into successes and so on.
Right.
Except I would contend that where are those examples? I mean, so much so, is it that the culture isn't focusing on that we're actually focusing on Oprah not, actually being able to lose the weight, and
right.
the example of Obama not, continuing to smoke cigarettes? Where are those examples? Have you run into them? Have you seen that when you apply this knowledge that you're talking about, that transformation can happen and sustain itself in real examples?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I think part of the reason we don't hear. I think there are examples. Certainly, there are people who turn their lives around, and often we know of them only later in life. So you sort of only meet them once they are quite successful. But if you sort of probe into the past, you find that there was a time when they really didn't have their act together. It's also true that sometimes you just don't see. Very successful people often do have some things they struggle with. I can tell you I have many examples in the book where I give myself as an example, because when I learned about, I was always very, very focused on school and did really, I was just that kind of kid. And, that school really mattered to me, and I always did really well there, but in many, many areas of my life, I didn't do so well. I can tell you, for example, that actually in the course of writing this book, I lost 50 pounds because it's really funny, how you find medical doctors who smoke cigarettes even though they know they shouldn't. You often find psychologists, especially research psychologists, who work in areas and don't actually apply the lessons of what they're doing to their own lives. And I was very much guilty of that. It wasn't really until I sat down to write the book and thought about, okay, how can I translate all of these years, decades of research into usable strategies that people can use in their everyday lives? Because, of course, when academics and researchers write things up, we write in this terrible jargon that is so dense no one can read it. So I thought, okay, well, how can I write this in English and say, here's the practical take-home message, here's what you should do? And as I was doing that, I thought, really, for the first time, hey, that's something I should be doing. And I had gained about 50 pounds from having 2 children, and it was just stubbornly not going anywhere. But I have to say, I was not actually approaching it in a way that was strategic, that was using the knowledge that I knew from motivation, from my research, and I had been just sort of telling myself, I just don't have the willpower to lose this weight, and I thought, wait a minute, here I am telling everybody else that's not the way willpower works, and so I should start using, and so I started using some of the techniques I talk about in the book that you can really apply to any goal. I started applying them to my weight loss goal, things like if-then planning, thinking about when my low willpower moments would be. And I set myself also, the goal of losing the weight, but losing it in a slow way. I was going to just do it through steady changes over time, and kind of getting that I talk about in the book, the sort of get better mindset rather than the be good mindset. So thinking about it in terms of making progress over time. And it took about, probably from start to finish about 2 years, but the weight came off. And so I think there are a lot of people who are very successful in some areas of their lives and less successful in other areas of their lives, and they don't necessarily realize that the reason that's true is that they are doing the right things in one area and failing to do them in the other. And I can tell you certainly that's true in my case. When it came to my work, I was very good about planning. I was very organized. I used many of the strategies intuitively when it came to my work that I used in order to lose weight, but I had just never applied them to losing weight before. So
let me, this was actually, this is a terrific segue into sort of the nittier-grittier section of the interview. And so can you go into a little bit of detail about, you talk about this, of course, in the book, and you just mentioned it as one of the keys to losing 50 pounds, which, by the way, unbelievable. Congratulations.
It was good.
You look fantastic.
Thank you about it.
So it's if-then planning.
Right.
You talk about that as if that is indeed one of the key kind of life hacks that you started applying to your health and weight loss.
It is.
Describe what that
if-then
is.
planning is so extraordinary as a tool. I've often joked to colleagues that if I could sort of take every life management book, every motivation book, every diet book on the market and just slide a little pamphlet in the back about how to do if-then planning and use it with respect to whatever the course that's recommended in the book, that people would be just extraordinarily more successful. The average, there have been, I think, about, at this point at least about 200 published studies looking at if-then planning as a tool. It's a particular way to go about planning how you will achieve a goal. And it's so effective. On average, the success rates jump, they double or triple on average. So for instance, in exercise, we find that people who use this technique go from, and who have the goal of introducing a regular exercise routine into their lives, go from success rates around 32% on average to 91% on average. So this is a very typical result. And the way if-then planning works is very simple. What you do is you decide in advance when you're going to try to achieve really any goal, where and when you're going to take particular actions in order to reach the goal. And when we think about planning, we normally just think about listing the steps we need to take in order to reach the goal. So if I know that I want to, let's just use weight loss as an example, we tend to make plans that are, well, I'll exercise more and I'll eat less. And that sort of sounds like a plan. But it's really not a very good plan. And it's not a good plan for several reasons. First of all, we're not getting nearly specific enough about the actions we need to take in order to reach the goal. And this is a problem people have without realizing it all the time, that they're not really getting to the level of very concrete actions that need to be taken. And then the other thing that they're not doing is thinking about where and when they will actually take these actions. So, for example, exercising. It's great to say I want to exercise more, but where and when are you actually going to exercise more, and in what way are you going to exercise? So we find that when people say, for instance, well, okay, when it's Monday, Wednesday, or Friday at 8 a.m. before I go to work, I'll go to the gym for 45 minutes. And when you make that very simple plan, you've decided exactly what action you're going to take and where and when you're going to take it, your chances for success go up about 200 to 300%. And the reason it works is that it works really for two reasons. One is that we routinely don't get to that really specific level. So if-then plans force you to get specific about the actions you need to take, not just saying, I'll eat less, but what will you eat less of and how much less, right? So what are the specific things you're going to do to reach your goal? And then when and where are you going to do them? Because the other thing we often do without realizing is miss opportunities to act on our goal. So we had a moment that would have been a good moment to act on the goal. It was 8 o'clock on Monday. We weren't really doing anything. That would have been a good moment to seize to go to the gym, but because you didn't think about it in advance, you don't seize that moment. So if-then plans really help us to identify the situations where we could be acting on our goals before they slip through our fingers, and then seize those opportunities and take the actions we need to take in order to reach the goal. So that's the basic idea.
So it sounds somewhat similar to the framework of SMART goals. How does it depart from that? Where is it? Why is the success rate to if-then planning so much higher than SMART goals? How is it different?
I think that's a great question. With SMART goals, the elements are all there, but they're not necessarily connected in a way that makes them really essentially easy for your brain to use. So what's nice about if-then plans is by taking the if and the then, right, and connecting them. So the situation you're going to take to act on and the specific action you're going to take, it links those two concepts together in your mind. And basically it forms what psychologists call a contingency, right? So if X, then Y. And the wonderful thing about contingencies is that that's basically the language of the brain. Your brain likes to process information and store information in terms of contingencies. If X happens, then I'll do Y. So it's putting the plan in your brain's natural language. And then what you're able to do with if-then plans that doesn't really happen with SMART goals is kind of take advantage of your unconscious mind's processing power. You know, our brains are incredibly active and have enormous processing capacity. But what we're conscious of at any moment in time is really just the tiniest fraction of what's going on. And really most of the goal pursuit that we engage in on a daily level is happening sort of on an unconscious level in your mind. So your brain is kind of taking actions and doing things in order to reach goals, and you may not even be aware of it. So the if-then plan is really acting on often cases an unconscious level in your mind, where your brain, when you make this if-then plan, if it's 8 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, then I will go to the gym. And then what happens is your brain, without you realizing it, is scanning the environment for 8 a.m. on Monday to occur. And it's actively looking for it. And then when that moment occurs, it says, ding, 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 you're supposed to go to the gym right now. And that thought, oh, I'm supposed to go to the gym, will pop into your mind. So you're really kind of getting to take advantage of more of your processing power, more of your potential by putting the information in this kind of language. I think the SMART goal system is great for identifying, it's identifying critical steps you need to take when you're setting goals for yourself. But this if-then plan is really about implementing goals. It's about going from committing to the goal to actually getting yourself to take the action you need to take, and that's where I think it has the advantage. It brings something new to the picture.
Has that actually affected, for instance, the way you put together a to-do list? How have you implemented this on your day-to-day planning? So are you doing if-then planning? Is that the shape and design of your to-do list?
It is, and it's interesting that you say that, because it becomes something that's once you get in the habit of if-then planning, it becomes automatic to, once you've written down something that you're going to do, your next step, your next thought becomes, when and where am I going to do this? And it becomes sort of very surprisingly quickly, it becomes a habit. So if you're writing your to-do, I do two things. I do actually have a to-do list, just sort of like a regular scrap of paper. I often jot things down. But I do find now that when I write something down, I also write next to it the when and where. I also use my calendar a lot more for putting so I actually put the to-do list into the calendar, so I've got the when nailed down in addition to the what. But it does become a habit very quickly of thinking in these terms. And the other thing that we find, incidentally, is that it's really not necessary to write it down. I often tell people, and generally speaking, it's useful to write things down to kind of clarify your thoughts. But if-then plans actually work without writing them down. And in fact, most of the studies of if-then planning, most of those 200 studies, don't involve writing down the plans and don't involve repetition of the plan at all. It seems to be, as I said, because it's written, the plan is created in this contingency language that your brain really likes. It just sticks without repetition, without reminders. It's really incredible. It's actually one of the single most effective, I would say without exaggeration, strategy that we've discovered in 40 years of studying motivation and achievement for just radically improving people's chances of success. I should say that they do only work when you're actually committed to the goal. So sometimes I'll hear from people that say, well, I tried if-then planning and, it didn't work. And then when I probe, why it's not working, there's really two reasons why it doesn't work. One is that you weren't very committed to the goal to begin with. So really it was something that you didn't want to do. If you don't really want to achieve this goal, then if-then planning won't work, because that initial phase of scanning won't happen. Your brain is sensitive to how committed you are to a goal. And it's only when you have a lot of commitment that your unconscious mind sort of kicks in to try to help you to reach it. You have to have commitment. And then the other thing is that if-then plans don't work if you're not getting specific enough. So if you say things like, well, when I go out to dinner, I'll order something that isn't so bad for me. That's a terrible if-then plan, right? Because something that isn't so bad for me is very subjective. And when you're looking at that menu, you're going to want to convince yourself that a cheeseburger isn't so bad for you. So you really need to make if-then plans that are quite specific. So it has to, instead of saying, I'll order something that isn't so bad for me, it should be, I'll order a salad. That kind of specificity is really what's needed in order for these plans to be effective.
And do these things need to be close by, or because they're the language is processed in such a way that you're talking about and retained, that in simply going through the process, that you're tapping into the effectiveness of the whole scenario?
I think that's a great question. I think that if you pushed it too far, that there would be, if you make an if-then plan for something that you're going to do next year, that might be a little bit more than I wouldn't be so sure that would work. But if it's something next week or even next month, we have very good success rates. There was a study that I did looking at, they were sophomores in high school who were studying for the PSAT over the summer. And the PSAT actually happens in October. And so we gave them booklets of practice PSAT tests, and then we said to half of them, okay, when and where are you going to work on these PSATs? And we found that over the course of the summer, the kids who didn't have a plan for when and where they would work on them solved about 100 questions on average over the summer. And the ones who did have a plan solved about 250 problems on average. And you could actually see that difference in terms of preparation show up in their PSAT scores in the fall. So that's over the course of a whole summer, and it's a single plan made at the beginning of, and these are 15-year-olds who generally don't have a lot of willpower when it comes to these sorts of things. So we do see the plans being effective over long periods of time, over months at a time. I think you can get long-term benefits out of if-then plans, even stretching into the future. But I do think there's probably limits, and frankly, we don't know. Research just hasn't been done to test what the time limits are on effectiveness.
So I could spend a lot more time on this, but one thing I wanted to get to before we have to let you go is what I refer to as a sort of an online phenomenon. You wrote a blog post called 9 Things Successful People Do Differently. Mm-hmm. I think it was originally for Harvard Business Review, right?
Right.
Since then, it's shown up on everything from the Huffington Post to countless others. And I think it's been the most popular blog post of 2011 for Harvard Business Review.
Right.
And you wrote that in February.
Right.
And that's given the crowd of other authors and experts you're working with, quite an accomplishment.
Thank you. And it's been really amazing. It's still on the top 10 list, I think, right now. It's really, I've gotten a tremendous response to it, and I think that has a lot to do with a combination of the 9 things that I talk about that are predictors of success, of reaching goals that you set for yourself. Some of them, I think it's a combination of people. Some of them seem obvious, or if not obvious, people recognize them and say, yes, that makes sense. Others, they read and they say, wow, that's surprising. I hadn't thought of that. So there's that combination of things, I think, that's made it a successful post. But it's really a condensed version of really the same things I'm talking about in the book.
So I thought we'd go through each one, and if you could just flesh them out, not just a couple sentences about the why they're among the 9 things, and also you made a little bit of a note to this when you said that some people refer to them as obvious. I think, and as all really successful blog posts are, it created a bit of a provocation in that some people said, what are these? Come on, this is general. This is, how do you execute this? And so. I'm sure you've read some of these comments.
Oh,
maybe,
sure.
To the ones to the things that caused some of the most ardent or most skeptical comments. You can use this as a form to reply. The first one is get specific.
Right.
This is about how to write a goal.
It's really about thinking about what your goal is, and get specific is one of these strategies that I think you do get a lot of people reacting to and saying, well, of course you're supposed to get specific. I think for many of these tips that seem obvious, I think where the surprise factor comes in is how powerful they are. It's not surprising that getting specific about what you want to achieve is a good thing. What is surprising is how good it is. And there have now been over 1,000 studies looking at the impact of people getting very specific about their goals versus being very vague. So, or somewhat vague. So instead of saying, I want to get ahead at work, saying, I want a promotion to this level by this date. That's quite specific. And it turns out, again, you're multiple times more likely to reach your goal if you get very specific about it. And there's lots of good reasons for that. One is that when our goals are vague and we keep them kind of in the abstract, so I want to be more successful, I want to have more work-life balance, I want to lose more weight or live more, have more healthy living habits. When we keep it vague, it's really not clear what the next step should be, right? So there are many, many ways to be more successful at work. There are many, many ways to live a healthier life. And when our goals don't give us direction about what actions we should take, then we tend to not take them. So getting specific about what you want, instead of saying I want to be more successful, saying I want to be at this level by this time. Instead of saying I want to lose weight, how many pounds do you want to lose and on what kind of time frame? Instead of saying I want to live a healthier life, what new health habits do you want to include, and what bad health habits do you want to get rid of? So when we get specific about it, then it becomes clear I need to do X, Y, and Z in order to reach that goal. And the thing is, we often tend to be abstract about our goals because we kind of like being abstract about our goals, right? It feels a little bit more connected to sort of our dreams. We think I want to be successful. The problem is that that's not a really practical way to think about what it is you want to achieve. So getting specific, while obviously a good thing, is actually just much more powerful than people realize because it has this chain reaction of making it very clear what steps you need to take, and then you can work your way from there. And that's really essential. Figuring out exactly what you need to do is an essential step for actually doing it. So it's a very powerful strategy, even if it seems a little bit obvious.
Okay. The second one now I see in a completely different light. Just following on our conversation of if-then planning, you make a reference to it, but certainly not as robust as one that you hit in your book or even just in this conversation, and now it makes perfect sense. Seize the moment to act on your goals.
Yeah, seizing the moment again is that when people say what are the main reasons why we fail to reach our goals, and there are many reasons, but the top two, just in terms of looking over the research of people in all domains of life pursuing goals. The top two problems you come up against again and again and again are not getting specific about the actions you need to take, so not thinking about what exactly do I need to do in order to reach this goal. And then the second big one is not seizing opportunities to act on the goal, letting those moments pass you by. We say to ourselves at the end of a long day, I didn't have time to do X, Y, and Z. That's almost never literally true. What is true is that you made choices. You had a moment where you could have worked on that goal, and you chose to do something else. And maybe you chose to do something else for a very good reason. But without thinking in advance about when we are going to take action on our goals and under what circumstances we're going to do it, those actions just don't get taken. We find, if you look across the literature on goal pursuit, that there is a gap between goal commitment and achieving goals that is really extraordinary. We tend to think that being committed to something is what really matters, that to really want it. And that does matter, but it just doesn't matter nearly as much as we think it does. It's a necessary condition, but it's not even close to sufficient. So we find across studies in the health domain, for example, that people who are highly committed to their goals, who really want to change their behavior, who really want to do the right thing, end up failing more than 50% of the time. And in fact, across all areas of life, it's more like failing about 70 to 80% of the time. So they have the commitment, but they don't take the actions they need to take. And but my book and in many ways this blog post is all about trying to get people to see what the obstacles are between wanting something and actually making it happen. And seizing opportunities is the other big problem that we have when we're trying to bridge that gap.
So the third and the fourth I almost group together, the third and fourth things that successful people do. The third is know exactly how far you have left to go in terms of monitoring, and fourth is be a realistic optimist. I took this as somewhat of this can be about feedback and knowing where you are and having the right kind of that there needs to be a process, and sometimes, this is the social capitalist, the right people in place to self-regulate, to give you the information. You're not far enough along. You're not. Is that right?
I think that's absolutely right. We need the third thing about monitoring and getting feedback is really essential. Nobody stays motivated in a vacuum. Nobody continues to work hard when they don't know how well they're doing, and nobody improves without having access to resources that can help them improve, right, that can give them guidance about where they're going wrong. So having the right people in place to give the necessary feedback is essential. The realistic optimism part, that fourth thing, really has a lot to do with the necessity for honest feedback. That while it's important that feedback always be optimistic in the sense that you're always giving the message you can improve, improvement is possible, it also needs to be honest. I think very often we shy away from telling people what they need to hear because we are too worried about protecting feelings. And while I think it's important to be tactful, it's very important to be honest. No one has ever improved without understanding what they were doing wrong and what they can do to fix it. And I think when part of your role is to give feedback, you have to understand both of those elements are important. Honesty and a real sense of real honest information about what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong matters, and also guidance about where to go from here matters. And so I think those two things speak to both of those critical elements for getting people motivated and helping them stay motivated and continuing on a course of improvement.
Now, again, 5 and 6 I grouped together as well. Number 5 is focus on getting better rather than being good, and I think that taps into the Carol Dweck's research on mindset and so on. And number 6 is have grit. It seems like the two really kind of work together.
They do. They're kind of, because in fact one turns out to be sort of the necessary ingredient for the other. So that the idea that we should, our mindset, as you say, this comes from my mentor is Carol Dweck, who wrote the book Mindset, and her work has a lot to do with this idea that when we think about what we're doing in terms of making progress over time, rather than being perfect right from the get-go and proving ourselves, then you get tremendous set of benefits from that. That people experience less anxiety, they stay motivated even in the face of difficulty, they enjoy what they're doing more, they find it more interesting, and they're able to handle negativity, handle negative feedback, handle negative emotions in a much more positive way. So you find that over time they are absolutely the top performers with this get better mindset. It's one of these ironies that, sort of allowing yourself to make mistakes means that you'll end up making less of them because you won't be quite so anxious and you'll be able to really kind of focus on the task at hand. So that's that get better mindset. That second part, have grit, has to do with the fact that we find again and again that persistence really matters in terms of achievement, in terms of any kind of great achievement. And so grit is this quality that has to do with a person's ability to commit to long-term goals and really persist in the face of difficulty. Interestingly, we find that grit outperforms even things like IQ when looking at performance in school. So grit is really important, and one of the key predictors of grit, of being able to persist over the long haul, turns out to be having this get better mindset, that people who see their abilities as malleable, who think that, if I'm not good at this now, I can become good at it later, naturally seem to have a mindset that allows them to be gritty in the pursuit of their goals and really kind of persist over the long haul.
the seventh thing is build your willpower muscle. I was surprised that you put this seventh, just because you almost, this idea of self-control was so important to you that it almost was the sort of preface of your book.
Yes.
Talk about that.
They're not in order of importance, so I should say that from the get-go. Right. The willpower muscle is really an important idea. That we many of us tend to think of intelligence as something that we're born with. Many of us also tend to think of willpower as something that we're born with. That there are just people who seem to have a lot of willpower and people who don't. And it turns out that's not true. That there's a lot of research now suggesting that willpower is very much like a muscle. So it's like a bicep or a tricep in really three important ways. One is that it gets tired with use. So again, no matter how strong your muscles are, if you really tax them, they're going to feel like jelly, right, after a long workout. And willpower is like that when you've spent all day putting out fires at work and dealing with stresses, and you've used up a lot of your willpower just, in your self-control, just kind of coping with the day, you don't have a lot left at the end of the day for things like sticking to your diet. This is why, of course, there are so many successful people who sort of have a famous weakness for something, right? They spend all of their willpower in the area of their lives in which they're very successful, and just really don't have much left over for coping with that temptation or that weakness. So everybody, no matter how much willpower you have, will have moments of low willpower after they've taxed a lot. The second way in which willpower is like a muscle is that you actually will bounce back after a rest. So if you kind of give yourself a break and try to protect yourself from temptation at the moments that you know you'll be weakest, you'll find that actually your willpower, your self-control does bounce back, and you'll have more of it later. So after a rest, it comes back. And then the third, and I think anyways, most important finding with respect to willpower being like a muscle is that it builds with exercise. So the more you use it, the more you do things in your life that require willpower, the stronger your willpower muscle becomes. The more you don't use it and you kind of just let it atrophy, the weaker your willpower becomes. So one of the things I talk about a lot in the book is before you tackle something that is a really large willpower challenge, something that really will involve a lot of resisting temptation, like quitting smoking or going on a significant diet that has a radical dietary change. When you're about to tackle something like that and you don't really feel like you have the willpower for it, it's better to start with some smaller exercises, so adding little routines to your life that involve using up small amounts of willpower, right? Making your bed every day, or doing 25 sit-ups every morning, or sitting up straight every time you catch yourself slouching. And there's actually a great deal of research showing these simple little self-control exercises have significant impact on your self-control over time. So even after just 2 weeks of sitting up straight, every time you think of it, you'll have measurably more self-control. So I think it's it's one of these messages that is very positive because it suggests to people that, look, you really can get more of this very valuable resource if you want more of it. The great thing is that it's a message that's also very much grounded in science. So it's not just a feel-good message. It actually turns out to be, really true. This is the way willpower works.
So now quickly on to the last two. I'd rather spend more time on 9 than 8. 8 is of the 9 things successful people do is they don't tempt fate. So they don't self-sabotage themselves by taking on too much or something like that. That's really what that's about, right?
It's very much a part of this whole willpower idea, that once you understand that willpower is limited and that no matter how much you have, there will be times when it's low, you understand the need for protecting yourself from temptation and not putting yourself in harm's way. So I think it's part of the willpower story, but it's an important point.
And number 9, again, now this changes the way I read it based on our conversation. Focus on what you will do, not what you won't do. That seems, again, to tap into this incredibly powerful strategy and process of if-then planning. Is that right?
That's right. It actually, that tip comes directly from some research on if-then planning that compared different kinds of plans and how effective they were. And they compared people who made if-then plans that were just about stopping doing something. So if I feel the urge to smoke, then I won't. If I feel the urge to send a nasty email to my boss, then I won't. And they compared that. So that's just about if I want to do something, then I won't do it. They compared that to plans that again tackled the same issue, but by instead focusing on what you would do. So if I feel the urge to smoke, then I will step outside and take a deep breath. Or if I feel the urge to smoke, then I will chew some gum. Or if I feel the urge to tell off my boss, then I will call my friend and complain instead. Right? So what will you do instead? And they found that, in fact, not only were the instead plans, the what will you do instead plans, much more effective. In fact, the negation plans, the ones that were just about I won't do X, actually tend to backfire. So there are some results that suggest that when you focus just on what you won't do, you end up doing more of it. And this has to do with these sort of ironic processes in the brain, where when we try to suppress something, we actually build it up so that once we're not focused on suppressing it anymore, there's sort of a release and we think about it more. It's the classic, don't think about white bears. When you tell someone not to think about white bears, all they want to do is think about white bears, and that's called ironic monitoring rebound effect. And we find that with plans as well. So it's very important to not just say, I'm not going to do X anymore, but to talk about what you're going to do instead. When you're going to try to get rid of a bad habit, what good habit are you going to replace it with? That turns out to be the most effective way to change habits and to take steps toward reaching a goal.
If this last hour wasn't enough, then I have to include this inducement to our listeners that Heidi Grant Halvorson's new book, Succeed, How We Can Reach Our Goals, was one of the best, if not the best, books I've read on goals and goal achievement. And trust me when I tell you that I have read way too many of them. And that everyone really should go out and buy this book, especially for I just think for everyone, but young people should really should read this book.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you so much for spending the time with us. It's been a great interview, and I hope we get another chance, and I get another chance to talk to you about the work that you're going to do in the next couple of years.
I would love to. Thank you so much, Paul. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much.